Hello again, you're watching the press preview here on Sky News this Saturday evening. Joining us is the Daily Telegraph's London editor, Andrew Gilligan, and director at the Institute for Middle Eastern Democracy, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening, welcome, thanks for coming in. Let's just update you first with what's on the front pages of those Sundays, and we'll start with The Independent on Sunday. And it says that Rupert Murdoch will be flying back into the UK following the arrest of 5 staff from the Sun newspaper today. Same story, indeed, on the front page of The Observer. That paper claiming Mr Murdoch will arrive sometime this week. Sunday Times has a photo of Osama bin Laden's younger children. It says he told them to go to US and Europe to get a good education. Sunday Mirror has an exclusive, it says, on the cage fighter who masterminded the £53 million Securitas robbery. It reports he fathered a child from his jail cell in Morocco. George Osborne has ruled out tax breaks for married couples in next month's budget. That's according to the Sunday Telegraph, at least. While The People claims William and Kate had a mid-air scare. It says the royal couple's pilot was forced to take emergency action 200 feet off the ground. British Airways tonight saying it was nothing too dangerous. Sunday Express reports that if cuts to the armed forces continue, Britain will not be able to say that it has an army. And finally, Amanda Holden saying life just couldn't get any better following the arrival of her baby girl, Holly Rose. But she has gone back to work as well. So, what do our guests make of those papers? Good evening once more and welcome. Thin pickings on the political front mainly. Sundays normally go with some political stories, but not too much. But we'll start with, I guess, The Observer. And it is more problems for this man, Rupert Murdoch, flying in sometime.
You remember two weeks ago today on this show, we were talking about the first set of arrests at the Sun for allegedly bribing police officers and whatnot. Now this is the second lot, and this is even more serious in a sense because even more of the paper's senior staff have been you know, taken in for questioning. It was the executive editor before and the head of content, and now it's the deputy editor, the chief reporter, the picture editor, and the chief foreign correspondent.
Is there anyone left to get a paper out for Monday morning?
That is the problem. I mean, Dominic Mohan, the editor, has not been arrested, but you know, he's one of relatively few senior people who has not felt in some way the force of this inquiry. And I can only imagine what's going on at the Sun. I'm actually really worried about it. To be honest, I've never paid a police officer for information or a service person for information, but actually I think in certain limited circumstances I might be prepared to.
Well, this is the argument, isn't it? Is there justification, if there is a defence, if you can call it, of it being in the public interest?
Well, I think also, you know, we've got to remember that there's two sides to every coin. And what's happened here as well, it says that armed Surrey police officer has been arrested, a member of the Armed Forces, Ministry of Defence employee. And so actually what we're looking at is not just this level of corruption or wrongdoing in the newspapers, but also on the other side, people who are willing to take money in order to give stories to journalists. And of course journalists...
But is that necessarily corrupt? That's my problem. I mean, if you give, say, a juror a bribe to acquit you in a criminal case, that's corruption. If you give a councillor a bribe to, you know, put your planning permission through, that's clearly corruption. But is paying for information, which is probably what's happened here, is that corruption?
I think if you work for the Ministry of Defence and you're taking money in return for giving stories out to journalists, that's obviously something that shouldn't be done in those jobs, wouldn't you say?
No, I don't necessarily say that. As I say, I was a defence correspondent for 10 years nearly at the BBC and at the Telegraph, and I never paid anyone, you know, in the forces during the course of those jobs. But actually, the fact is, the Ministry of Defence is one of the most secretive and untruthful organisations in this country. And sometimes, I think, in perhaps quite rare circumstances, but there might be a case for paying somebody to give you information in the public interest.
I think for me, it's actually... I sympathise with what you're saying, but it's the other way around. I think that we can expect journalists to perhaps be giving money in order to get information for stories, because journalists, their job is to go out and get the story. But what I think we ought to expect is for the people in these positions of responsibility working, say, for the Ministry of Defence, not to sell secrets.
Would it be as corrupt if the same individuals in the Ministry of Defence accepted... I don't know, glass of wine, nice buffet dinner from an arms company at an exhibition? Come and have a look at our latest fair, and we'll show you around.
Isn't that what it's about? I mean, it's about lines and where you draw them. Yeah. It's obvious that in the examples that we're seeing coming out now in the News International papers and doubtless in other papers as well to come, people cross lines, but where those exact lines are drawn, it's always hard to say.
Yes.
What we're seeing is a problem. Like you say, I quite often did buy lunches and dinners for people at the Ministry of Defence, and some of them weren't authorised to talk to me. Famously, of course, David Kelly was not authorised to talk to me. He only got an appetise out of me, by the way, in terms of what was materially
But
on
he was
offer.
a contact, as
he
was
was a
known in
contact.
Australia.
And if they're going to start criminalising any kind of unofficial contact or hospitality of any description between journalists and sources, then it's the end of free journalism.
The argument, of course, that's being used is that the Telegraph MP's expenses campaign would not have actually happened without a payment being made for the electronic information that was handed over.
And that was stolen information.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'll ever get to a
about
situation where we will have journalists who aren't able to contact sources, who aren't able to
I think
informal
that's
chats.
precisely what the authorities want, to be honest. I think it's certainly what the police want. They just want to be able to control the information flow so that only things we're able to report are what the press office officially tells us, which is often, to put it at its kindest, part of the truth.
And it will be a bad day for journalism when that happens.
Well, there will be no journalism,
and
will there?
exactly, and a bad day for the public who won't get to see the truth of what's happening.
You know, I was monstered by the Sun during the Hutton inquiry, but I feel strong fellow feeling with the people who've been arrested today, and I hope they can argue public interest in what they did. And I
Particularly as
hope
the
they get off.
indications are, the inquiries will continue not just at the Sun, but to other papers, perhaps even more broadsheets. So.
I mean, you know, worrying stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's take up the Telegraph on the front page, top right-hand corner, which is top... Oops, let me press that again. There we go, we're back. And it's top immigration judge under fire over human rights rulings. Let's just blow that up for you. And it is Mr. Justice Blake. What's he been saying?
Well, he said that he's in trouble because he's apparently allowing people to stay in the country who oughtn't to be allowed here. I mean, we heard last week about the Abu Qatada case, and it's more of the same, really. It's hearing that there are judges, he's been accused of looking for reasons not to deport a killer. And it's the idea that concerns such as the right to a family life somehow trump the right of the general public not to have extremists or terrorists roaming among them within the country when these people weren't even meant to be here in the first place.
And is this, again, the human rights legislation and how it comes into a very sort of abrupt difficulty with domestic law in this country?
The thing about this story is not just the papers that have accused Mr. Justice Blake of a search for reasons for not deporting this killer. It's actually the Court of Appeal. Yeah. That's the point of the story. Yeah. And it's clear that somebody has finally started to realise that the public's patience with this kind of thing is wearing thin. That the fact is that I'm a big supporter of the European Convention on Human Rights. It is a bulwark against tyranny. But the protection of family life provision was not intended to allow killers who never had any right to be in this country to stay here. It was intended to, you know, it was intended to stop the government dragooning you into the Hitler Youth. That's what it was for. And it's been massively overextended by activist lefty judges.
Right, let's take a look at the Sunday Times and this extraordinary picture of happy family bin Laden. Children and grandchildren being held under armed guard in Islamabad, but he told them, go to the US and live in peace.
This is a great picture and a great story. These kids on the front page of the Sunday Times are the children who were living in the house that bin Laden was living in when he was killed. They're his family, and they don't look terribly happy for the understandable reason that they are, as you say, being held in 3 rooms under armed guard by the Pakistani ISI. And the worry, I presume the reason why the brother-in-law, Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law, Zakaria al-Sadr, has spoken out is because he's worried about what's going to happen to them in the ISI's hands. And he said, and indeed he said to these children, according to this brother-in-law, I don't want you to be like I was. I want you to go to the US and live in peace. Might be propaganda, but it might be true. I remember Jerry Adams' son, when Jerry Adams was a senior figure in the IRA, very noticeable that his son did not take any part in the activities of the IRA, and Adams was very
Would this actually
keen
be
to protect his son
a
from all that.
powerful weapon for the US, actually, to say that this man had seen the error of his ways, that in this war of words in terms of extreme fundamentalism, that they can argue this man had seen the error of his ways?
I think, on the contrary, it's more a sign that of what we're up against and what the US is up against and what the Western world is up against. It's people who are willing to take what they see as weakness in the Western world, enjoy the privilege of the education system and the freedoms that we allow certain people who come into our society and take those things, whilst at the same time...
legislation again,
well, there we are. But at the same time, bin Laden, he may have been sending his children or wanting to send his children to take advantage of our education system in the West, but he certainly wasn't in any way dampening down his attack on Western values or on freedoms and the lives of the people in the West who he was intent on killing.
Yeah. OK, Mail on Sunday. And I think we're going to go inside here, are we? Page 12, which I don't seem to have. So let's go back to the front page of Mail on Sunday, which, again, I don't have. Have you got a copy there?
We've got copies
right.
of the Mail on Sunday.
Tell me what's going to appear there.
This is a remarkable story, actually, about a woman who snatched a baby from a hospital in 1987, posed as her mother for more than 2 decades, and has only just been found out.
Right, here we go. We've got it now. We found it.
The child herself, she was only found out after the baby itself, which is obviously now more than 20 years old, 23 years old, actually saw herself as a child on a missing persons website and thought, that's me. And she had long believed that the person who claimed to be her mother wasn't her real mother, because they were too dissimilar in personality. The person who claimed to be her mother was a criminal, had lots of criminal convictions, and she didn't feel
she had an inkling something wasn't right.
And then she goes on this website, sees a picture of herself, recognises a picture of herself as a baby, and turns in her quote-unquote mother.
23 years she's
23
lived.
Years on.
So how on earth is she going to manage? She's gone back to her own biological mother, is she?
She's 23 now, of course, so she's probably an adult with a life and family of her own.
And the biological mother herself said, you know, she feels she's had all of this stolen from her, that there should be a year of imprisonment for each year of the life she was deprived of with her daughter. But really, how can you measure what sort of punishment to give to a person like that? This is such a shocking story to see somebody who would do something like this, and imagine what it must be like for the woman herself, now a grown woman, to have grown up with the wrong mother, the wrong parents. Her own natural birth parents are now separated.
And not only that, discovering that her parents had sued the hospital after the abduction in 1990. She received £500,000 in settlement, but has spent all the money.
Exactly. So it's all round. It's a very sad story for everyone involved, I think.
OK, well, coming up, more from the papers. We'll be finding out how a man in Britain's given birth to a baby. Yes, that's right, a man, and become Britain's first male mother as a result, and also a few more from inside the Sunday pages. Stay with us here on Sky News. More now from the Sunday papers. Joining us tonight, the Daily Telegraph's London editor, Andrew Gilligan, and director at the Institute for Middle Eastern Democracy, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening once more, and welcome to you. And we're going to now shrink our high street. A handy guide in the Sunday Telegraph. There it is. Oh, at the bottom, let's just take a look. We'll shrink the page. How do you shrink a high street, then?
Well, this is an interview by Justin King, who's the boss of Sainsbury's, I think the second biggest supermarket in the country. And he's saying, look, it's nothing to do with us, folks, that the high street is dying. It's not our fault. Don't blame the supermarkets. It needs to shrink anyway. The high street hasn't kept up with kind of consumer trends. Like, you know, he says it's not offering loyalty cards and that kind of thing. Now, I think that's a bit unkind, because clearly it is it's true enough that the high street doesn't have loyalty cards, but the supermarkets have a great many advantages.
It's economies of scale, isn't it?
Economies of
the
scale,
small shopkeeper just can't match them on price
They
very often.
They can screw down on suppliers, farmers and the like in a way that small shopkeepers simply can't. And that's why people go to supermarkets. Or it's one of the reasons. It's more convenient. They're open longer as well. Of course, that's true. But it's not right to excuse himself from blame for this guy.
But he wants to convert empty shops into classrooms. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's not a bad idea. I mean, it is in fact happening in a few places. I think they're doing it in East London. There's been a huge rise in the birth rate. They need more school space. So they're doing that in old office blocks and shops. But what actually needs to happen to the high street is it needs to be able to compete with the supermarkets on a level playing field. And one of the things that harms the high street often is parking. Supermarkets all offer free parking, but councils charge for parking in the streets. And I'm just covering a story in Ely, actually, in Cambridgeshire, where the council wants to impose parking charges, and the local traders are really worried it's going to kill off their rather nice town centre, because there's a massive Sainsbury's on the outskirts of that town, and a new Tesco's coming as well. And that's the kind of thing that we've got to look at, and that's the kind of thing that Mary Portas, the TV retail guru, talked about in her report about saving the high street. So it's no good just to say the high street's death is inevitable, like this guy does. We must let it go.
Because many shoppers do not
nobody
have the time to potter between the butcher, the baker and the grocer. That's the pleasure of shopping.
Yeah.
And have you ever tried to get round a Sainsbury's superstore quickly?
It's hardly a surprising story, is it? I mean, to hear that the head of Sainsbury's is making excuses for the demise of the high street and saying it's not his fault, it's not Sainsbury's fault, it's not Tesco's fault, it's not the big supermarket's fault. Well, I mean, it's obviously his angle on this, but it's I think a little bit disingenuous to suggest that it's a choice of pottering between the butcher and the baker and the grocer, or schlepping round this whole superstore style culture.
The bizarre thing is actually, it is quite often, I mean, my local market in Lewisham, it's a lot cheaper than any of the supermarkets if you want to pot around.
Yeah, and you can actually see all the veg
see what you get, and it's reasonably fresh. It's not...
Right, God blimey, EastEnders off BBC One in 15 hours of games a day. Blimey. Mail, page 7, is that right? There we are.
Absolutely. So it's another story about how the Olympics are going to completely turn upside down our lives. But in actual fact, it doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world.
I was going to say, is this necessarily a bad story?
Well, you're going to have to switch over to BBC Two if you want EastEnders. That's the great
huge
horror
effort
of
you're
this.
going to have to make.
However, some programmes, such as The One Show and Casualty, will be dropped altogether. Now, I happen to believe that's a pretty good thing. It's probably the only good thing the Olympics have done.
I would say the same,
but you know, this is basically yet another quest by the Olympics to make itself even more unpopular.
Well,
than it
here's
already
an
is.
interesting one. BBC Breakfast will remain on air. It will be Olympic-themed, and the BBC Trust was warned Ofcom that its news bulletins could be reduced if the sporting action overruns.
Yeah, when the BBC goes for something, it goes utterly overboard. Have you noticed its coverage about the Royal Jubilee? Now, I know I'm not a great opponent of the royal family, but the BBC's been utterly fawning in its coverage, and it's going to be embarrassingly fawning over the Olympics. And every outlet,
if we don't win anything.
Yeah, every outlet's going to be insufferable. And actually, huge numbers of people don't really care about the Olympics. And actually, a relatively small number of people
this is the one we've all been waiting for. Man gives birth to baby, which is, I think, in the Sunday Times. Is that right?
That's right. We've got a man who is a man now, born a woman, had a sex change.
Right, so it's not quite as good as... Right, OK.
Well, it's still pretty incredible, and decided to have his womb...
Oh, it's right, it's hiding at the bottom of the page there.
There we are, front page, but down the bottom right.
Yeah.
And he was born as a woman, but chose to have gender realignment surgery and had his womb left intact. And so they speculate in the article that maybe he had a caesarean delivery. I dare say that's a possibility. But it's an extraordinary story, and I think what it's bringing to light is the idea that in this era when we have a better understanding of people with conditions where they feel they're born into the wrong gender's body, we're going to see more of these stories. I don't think they're going to become daily events.
I'm confused as to why someone will want to have a sex change operation and then have a baby.
Yes, well, me too. I think it's...
I'm scratching my head.
I suppose what we've got to consider is the idea that maybe you'd feel...
You're looking as puzzled as I am.
Well, I think the main reason must have been to give the Sunday Times a great story.
It's an undercover journalist, isn't it?
That's what it is.
It's not the only time this has happened. There are other countries in which it's happened.
Although they say, as far as we know, there's only him, i.e. our bloke in Britain, one man in America and one in Spain who've done this. So, once again, Britain leads the world.
But if you're having a gender change, then you change your gender.
You would think, but maybe what we're learning from these people and their conditions, to try and put a serious spin on it perhaps, is that gender maybe is a little more fluid when you're at the edges of the definitions.
Okay.
I don't know, I can't tell you, but that's why I thought it was an interesting one to have a look at.
Right.
Pleasure.
OK. Right, Mail on Sunday, page 15. We're going to run a royal bath, I think. Is that right? Let me find the tap to turn that one on. Here we go.
This is
wanted, a servant to run the royal bath. Not up the top, but down at the bottom, as it were.
This is they're advertising a post of salary of $14,200 a year to, quote, to put in the plug, turn on the tap and check the temperature of the water when the bath is full. You will, according to the advert, have to be, quote, committed to achieving exceptional standards of service provision. So it's desperate, isn't it, how corporate speak has infected even Buckingham Palace, but there you go.
I'm
they're going to do other things
by
as well.
another snapshot of life on the other side here as well, just above it. A Baroness Thatcher bronze auction for £120,000. A day shooting for 8 guns in Oxfordshire with lunch, £55,000. Dinner for 8 with Boris, the same price, £55,000. But you don't get to shoot him. That's the thing that's missing there. That's pretty high prices, isn't it? Again, in austerity times?
Well, certainly not something the Royal Bath Runner will be able to afford on that salary either, is it?
No. Anyway, as he takes a pot shot at Hoon, well, there we are. Whether he's paid money to do that, I don't know. However, right, now you've avoided football for some reason, but let's just reflect on the back page. There's going to be a couple of those in.
We've avoided football because we're bored stiff by it, frankly.
But is it about football or is it about, you know, trying to stamp out racism?
Well, the truth is racism shouldn't be acceptable in football, just the same as it shouldn't be acceptable anywhere else. And if this is becoming a story over the last 9 months or so, racism in football is re-emerging as this big controversy. Frankly, aren't we all bored of hearing about this? Racism is wrong in any career, in any profession.
Right, we'll wrap it up for this paper review then, in that case. Thank you very much indeed for your choice, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks very much indeed for that. Weather coming up now.